I am Cristina Santos, your host today, and we have a very special guest with us today, and a very timely talk that she has prepared for us. Nora Strejilevich is an Argentinian Canadian writer, an Emeritus Professor of Latin American Literature at San Diego State University. Her testimonial novel, Una sola muerte, numerosa, a single numberless death, was granted the Letras de Oro Award for Hispanic Literature in the U.S. It's been translated to several languages and adapted for the stage in Michigan. Her most recent books in Spanish are The Role of the Witness, Writing and Memory, El lugar del testigo, Esritura y memoria, her autobiographical novel, One Day, Out Toward the World's Edge, Un día, allá por el fin del mundo, and Tattoos on Paper, Tatuajes and papel, to be published this year. She has devoted her life to memory, testimonial narratives, and human rights. So we will begin today's talk. We are doing the live stream, and I welcome everybody in our live stream to today's talk. There, you will notice, is a chat bar to the right of your screen. You may put in your questions in the chat bar, and Sara Revilla, my moderator, will be moderating the questions, and we will save those questions to the end of the presentation. So feel free to drop your question in the chat bar, but we will be saving all questions to the end of the presentation. And now, with no further ado, I would welcome Nora, and welcome Nora to Cinema Chat, and I will pass the word to you.
Thank you very much, Cristina, and thank you for your invitation. We'll start. I understand that the movie linked to this conversation is Argentina 1985. So whoever saw it has some background to this talk. And I have to say that this is based on the first series of trial that took place in my country, Argentina, for crimes against humanity. Those sentenced for their crimes at that time were members of the military junta that took power in 1976 and stayed till 1984. Actually, these members of the military junta were condemned in 85 as serial killers because there was no such concept as crimes against humanity. The way in which the law cataloged these crimes changed in the current century, when another government restarted trials that had a period of amnesty, so it was back to zero, but then we came back in 2005, and we focused not only on the military, but also in civilians considered responsible for what till now are called crimes against humanity. Why? Because the project of national reorganization, as they named their dictatorial regime, meant the erasure of one sector of the population. And I belonged in that sector. So as you just have just heard, I wrote several books that are related to these issues because I was taken to a concentration camp or a detention center myself in July 1976. And I found out later that my brother, his partner, a friend of his, and were all taken with difference of hours that day to the same center. So we were a group, and only my brother's student partner or friend and myself survived. 2 months earlier, my cousins with my same surname had been kidnapped themselves. So this is only an example of how massive this method was. And they had the word subversives to determine who was to become a desaparecido or not. It was just a bit hard to determine what subversive meant. They were the ones to define it. During the trial in the movie, you see witnesses giving testimony. It did the same. I did the same in several trials. Although I didn't have so much to declare since I had been there less than a week. However, the experience was so dramatic that it changed my life. Actually, witnesses are needed when the methodology of the crimes is the erasure of the traces that happened also during the Holocaust, the Shoah, because all of this was a methodology of massive crimes committed so that there will not be traces. In the case of the Holocaust, people were turned into ashes, and here a lot of them were thrown from planes into the ocean. Testimony was needed in court in order to prove that this had actually happened. So you need a group of witnesses, and we have a group of witnesses because for reasons that we don't know, they left some people alive. I am one of them. One of our theories is that if they wanted to become gods that can determine the life or the death of people, they have to live alive, some people, because if they kill everybody, it's like a forceful and a duty. Whereas if they want to be gods, they can leave someone behind and then go on with the other. It gives them more power at the symbolic level. Otherwise, we don't understand why they didn't kill us all. Anyways, after this period in Argentina, but this is only one case, Argentina is only one case of state terror and can happen in anywhere in the world, and we'll go into that in a while. We have lots of literary and visual testimonies, since the dissemination of this material is the basis for the acknowledgement of all sorts of abuses that are widespread in our societies. So this is a cultural resistance that is needed, in particular, as I want to point out, at this very moment in which totalitarianism is spreading. It doesn't have to be the copy of a dictatorship. It can take different shapes. Totalitarianism is a concept that encompasses, but also goes beyond actual dictatorship, as the one I was a victim of. And this is why the issues dealt with within the movie do not belong to the past, but to the present. According to Hannah Arendt, the thinker that survived the Holocaust and came from Germany to the United States after the Second World War, well, actually, it was not actually after. She came in the midst of this whole process. She studied totalitarianism, and she said it can be defined as the instauration through the state of exception of a civil war, which allows for the physical elimination not only of political adversaries, but also of just any group of citizens that for any reason cannot be assimilated to the political system. State of exception means a set of rules that are in its origin in Rome were supposed to protect the country against external invasion, but in these days is used to just go against the Constitution or cancel the Constitution and implement a lot of laws that are exceptional and that rule the country beyond the Constitution. This is what's happening in Argentina today, and also, I believe, in the United States of America. A state of exception means that there are certain rules that mean that the Constitution doesn't protect you anymore. And that happened in a way at that time. But as I say, it's happening in different ways at different times. The state of exception tends more and more, Anna Arendt said, to manifest itself as the dominant paradigm of governments in contemporary politics. That's why I think that paying attention to the extreme way in which we experience this quite a while ago is very important to understand the present, where these things are not happening in this extreme for now. During state terror, sovereign power asserts that citizens can be abandoned by the law, left at the mercy of power. No organization can defend him or her. She or he is excluded from society in a limbo called at the time concentration camp. In this situation, violence without any legal face can freely act. And this is what happened to me. And this is why I spend the rest of my life writing about it. So the first book I wrote is called, in Spanish, as Cristina said, Una sola muerte, numerosa. This is the last edition, one of the last editions in Spanish in South America. This is from Chile. There is another one in Argentina. It was recently published in Italy, and it also has an English edition in the States, which has been done in 2002, but is still available. And this is a testimony that I wrote in a lyric fashion, but in which I didn't tell only my story, because this, as I said, is a group of people that are condemned by the state. So it was not only my voice which counted, but the voice of very many. This is why it's called a single numberless death. The numberless are voices, or numerous voices that appear in the text and that are not chronological. It's not only people who suffered torture in concentration camp. It's just anybody that went through this situation in different ways. So you see voices telling you different pieces of the story, and you never know how their stories started or finished, because that's the experience we had. Everything was so repressive, so we couldn't hear and know the full story of how something had happened and finished. And because people were disappearing, you didn't know where and when and how. And very many mothers who searched for their children and grandchildren throughout their lives are dying or died at 90, sometimes without having found out, most of the time, without having been able to find out what had happened to them. And the other book that I wrote is called El lugar del testigo. I have articles in English related to this, but I haven't published this book in English. And this is the whole study of testimony in trials, in literature, in different types of literary strategies. It's like you have different types of movies. You have documentary, you have fictional ones. The one you just saw is based on documentaries of the times, which you see pieces of here and there. So this is another strategy. You mix some fiction with real facts and with documentary material to create something that is not fictionalized, but it tells you a story in a more accessible way. In the case of El lugar del testigo, I don't study movies such as Argentina 85 because I had published it before it appeared, but I do have some comments about it. But before that, I will show you, for those who speak Spanish, Un día allá por el fin del mundo. And this is a story of exile, because I was kidnapped and taken to a clandestine center within the city of Buenos Aires, 15 or 20 minutes from my house. It's not like those concentration camps that you imagine from Europe. It was a building with some access to a down floor that had torture chambers and isolation cells where I spent days hearing voices and screamings of others, one of them my brother. And then when I was liberated, so-called liberated, the word wasn't the same anymore. And so I left. I was 24, 25 years old. I left the country as soon as I could in a week. And this is the story of all the countries I went through, very many throughout my life after that, without being able to actually stay in one place. I stayed in places, but what I was not able to do was forget. I wanted a holiday of all this story. I wanted to liberate myself from this story on and off because it's a very heavy burden story, but this is a story of how that is not possible. In each country where I went, I found the same story over and over, even if it was from Argentina or if it wasn't from Argentina, but it was the same story. I went to South Africa, it was the same story. In Guatemala, the same story. When I went to other places, Colombia, I found the same story over and over. But the good thing is that I end up declaring in the trials that were done after the 2000. And well, that's a way of reparation. And writing this book is the main way of reparation that I had. So what I wanted to mention about this movie is that, of course, we need heroes for good movies, people that you identify with. But, and I understand that these trials have these heroes in a way that are those that pronounced never again, no? The ones that were defending our point of view. However, you have to understand that these are collective processes. A lot of families of the disappeared, a lot of people put their lives into finding proofs, finding documentation, which was very hard. Survivors had threats over the phone of groups of armed forces that were still around saying, we'll kill you if you go to the trials and say something. So it was very hard to do for the witnesses. And what I found that in this movie is that it was a bit unfair with the witnesses. And I will explain why. In Argentina, as in every other country where there have been concentration camps, people who survive are a bit suspicious in the eyes of others. So people think, what did you do in order to survive? Why is my brother, my father, my mother not back, my son, and you are back? Well, of course, as I said before, if they wanted to be gods, the perpetrators wanted to be gods, they had to decide on our lives. We didn't have subjectivity anymore. We were numbers. When we arrived in the concentration camps, our names and surnames were taken away. We were given numbers and codes that we had to remember if we wanted to get out of there. So when we get out of there and we are in society back, people have suspicions that we did something wrong in order to survive. In this sense, it is very important that the role of the witnesses that are survivors is taken very seriously and with an ethical position, not to show them as collaborators. In Argentina, a lot of people have this idea that we were collaborators, again, one way or another. In the movie, There is one witness that appears very fast, and they are talking to him in a scene where they call her, well, you worked for them. He had been in the Escuela de Mecánica de la Armada, Victor Basterra. I don't recall if in the movie he appears with his name, but I suppose he does. And he was the real hero of the story, because there was a system in the concentration camp whereby, in that concentration camp, whereby some detainees at the end of all these years of dictatorship were allowed to go back home and come back to work at the concentration camp, because they're doing slave work. However, the families where they went back to were all threatened to death. So they were not free to say anything. They were just in jail, in and out of the concentration camp. This guy that is shown in the picture, he was a very knowledgeable man who could produce passports that were not real passports. He did passports that the military men needed to go abroad without being discovered. So he did work for them that was useful. And he also had a camera because he took the pictures of people who were coming in the concentration camp. These were the tasks that he had to do. And he didn't think he would survive, but just in case, every time he went home, he took pictures, the negatives, he took them, he hid them, and he took them to his home, risking his life and the life of his family to have proofs in the future in case he survived. Well, he did survive and took all these proofs to the trials, and it was amazing what he could prove. However, in this movie, his role is not recovered at all. If you watch the movie with attention and you see the scenes I mentioned, you will find that the idea that the audience gets is that he was this sort of collaborator that we don't understand very well what he was doing. So he was doing what I'm telling you. Anyways, this is why the voice of the witness is so important. We are the ones that know what really happened, and we should be contacted by the documentaries or by the artists that want to do movies about this time, so that the story is told in a way that makes everybody justice. Anyways, it's a wonderful movie. It is really worth watching. This is a detail from the point of view of a survivor, something new that I can tell you that other people cannot, but it's a very good way of having a picture of that time. It's excellent. Other than that, I would like to stop here. This is the books I talked about are not all my books, but it's those that are more important for me and for the topic, and you can ask questions if you would like to after I finish, and I finish now. Thank you.
Thank you, Nora. That was so much information and such what felt to be so condensed, and we can feel your passion. We can feel the history behind your words, and that last statement about the film and knowing, well, this does hold documentary snippets that are blended in, but we also have to be very aware there is a production team, there's a director that makes certain decisions, as you said, that sometimes give the wrong impression. As one of, I think I'll start with I'll be a little selfish and start with a question myself. You said something that really struck a really strong point to me that just it stuck with me. And it's when you were writing your last book and you said, or no, it was when you were exiled and living in different countries and seeing various similarities to what had happened in Argentina. And you said, I had to find a way to relieve myself of the burden of the story. Can you talk a little bit more about that? That you carried this burden. Not only have you lived through this traumatic experience, but that in your exile, you're carrying that burden of what do I do with this story? And I'm seeing similarities in my travels.
Yeah, well, when it was funny because when I went to my first exile, people were seeing me during the day with a smile and with a lot of energy because I was 25. I had a lot of energy, and they didn't see me as someone with a burden. They thought I needed therapy because it was weird. It is expected that someone coming from that situation shows it in a more evident way. However, the burden is not something that necessarily makes you sad. The burden is something related to responsibility. You feel that you, of course, it makes you sad sometimes, but I will give an example of a few days ago. The March 24th is the day in which the coup took place in 1976. So every March 24th, there is a huge demonstration here in Buenos Aires and in the whole country. This March 24, it comes with a lot of burden also because our government now goes back to a lot of dictatorial strategies, that state of exception that I mentioned. He rules not by the constitution, but by decretos de necesidad y urgencia. Necessity and your urgency decrease, but there's no need and there's no urgency, there's no, that's an invention. There is no need for such a way of performance. Anyways, because of that, the demonstration should have been sad because of the burden we all share. However, it was the happiest demonstration ever. There were dances, there were creative ways of depicting the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo, etc. I feel the same way. It's a burden because we carry this story. You know, in these demonstrations, there is a flag that is carried by the families of the disappeared that has around 6 blocks, and it's not the 30,000 disappeared. It's like a long, more than 6 blocks maybe. And you see it from above, and it's such a burden. They have to carry that, and it's a symbol of that burden. We carry the 30,000 people disappeared on us. But however, it has created a lot of reactions. The movie that we just mentioned, all my writings, the visual arts that has developed so much after it, the actual street art that we have in the city that is amazing. So I think that this burden, in a way, has been a legacy that has improved us as human beings. We have to be responsible for what has happened and do something about it. We cannot just look in a different direction. And if everybody in this world, or let's say more than half of the people living in this world, without having this experience, would just face what is happening without looking in another direction, we would have a better world without needing these traumatic experiences to make us aware. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. But but I think that this burden is interesting because there is a stage in your life in which you want to get rid of it, but in a way carrying it so that you share your life with it. you share with you have it, it's there, it's present, but it doesn't mean you're in a tragic mood every day.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think Sara, you had a question.
Yes, thank you so much, Nora. And I actually have two questions, and they relate to what you were just talking about. The first one is, I am wondering if you can tell us a bit more about the role of witnessing, and more in like terms of second generations or third generations. So you've talked about survivors, but there's also a lot about children of survivors or grandchildren of survivors. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit about that. And the second question might relate to this one. You talked about different genres and different styles, right? There's testimonial, there's poetry, there's street art, there's fiction. I'm wondering if you could share why you choose certain literary styles or genres to talk about your own experience, and how you feel that maybe fiction can contribute to testimony or film. So yeah, those are two broad questions.
How do you say bisnieta, which is the word I said before? Bisnieta?
Oh,
That would be great granddaughter.
yes.
Okay. I was just thinking on a sign that I saw in the last March that was great granddaughter. It was a kid holding that sign. And I was thinking on all the generations that are the legacy of this event. However, when we speak about survivors, I speak about the kids of disappeared people as well. First of all, they are not inheriting that legacy; they are part of it, because, as you know, there were some of them were born in concentration camps, and they were kidnapped as well because they were given forged identities, being actually adopted, and I say it with, it's not the right word, they were taken by families, mostly of the military, in a legal fashion. And the grandmothers of the disappeared are searching for them since then. We've 136, I think, were found, and there are 500 that they are in the list of people to be found. And it's an amazing search, and an amazing thing when they find one. And most of them have been always willing to get in touch with their original families, even if it's a shock that they find out that they are actually kids of disappeared. So I think that they are survivors as well. I call them survivors. And the work they have done is amazing, because this generation of the kids are born into the movie scene, the language of cinema. So they have created documentaries about the fathers. They have recorded how is it to live with that lack, with that silence, with only a letter from a mother or a father. And even Los Rubios, the blonde ones, it's a movie that makes even an irony about the way other movies talk about this. It's a daughter that wants to rebel against the generation of the parents for what they've done, because there was all this rebellion in the 70s that didn't take them into account, the kids. What were they going to go through if this happened? Anyways, the movie is a very acute critique of the way documentaries are done. So there is an amazing amount of movies done by the hijos, and also novels that are very innovative and are worth studying. But what and then there's other organizations that are the hijos, hijas, and then the nietes, the grandsons and daughters. And then there's another organization that is the sons and daughters of the perpetrators, which is very interesting. Is palabra desobedientes. Disobedient words is called. It's the generation that they are kids or grandkids of those who perpetrated crimes against humanity, and they don't want to be included in the families. They want to be critical, they want to denounce them, they want to be part of the human rights movement. And they have produced amazing things, because it's a very important thing to underscore that it's something ideological and you don't need to inherit any of that. Nobody has to inherit that. So in terms of the legacy, all these generations have done their lot. And I would say that the ones that are more attractive also in theater are the ones that are critical towards whatever traditional way of doing it has been repeating itself. Because even within these organizations, there are traditional way of doing things that become rituals. And some people come to throw a stone and say, let's do it differently. So I tried to do it differently, even within my generation. So it was traditional to just tell your story. Or in Central America, for instance, there was, because there's stories such as Rigoberta Menchú of women who didn't have the Spanish as their first language, such as me not having English as a first language. So they had a mediator who wrote the story in Spanish for it to be distributed. So there was a mediator. But so the stories were told in a certain way. When I came up with it, I needed something different, just because telling the story in a chronological order and trying to be clear for an audience with the facts didn't produce in me the effect that I needed. That was that I was creating something that represented me and my story. So I was more of a lyric mind, and I had to write poetry, and I had to break the language the same way they broke our bodies, in a way. And I had to fragment the text so that it would mimic memory that is fragmentalized and that goes from here to there and associates through images. And so the book is composed the way memory would work. And also I needed, because everything is insufficient when you want to speak about horror, but you don't want to be horrific when you speak about horror. You want to be soft in a way. You want to have your own language, and it doesn't have to be horrific. So I quoted phrases from the military, but then I developed my own scene out of that was very different or was in contrast to what they said. Or I used information from newspapers in order to combine ways of saying and to show that the lyric and the poetry had a lot to say in these matters. And I think this type of language, which also is similar to a fictionalized version of things, because fiction it creates metaphors with images. I created metaphors with testimony. It doesn't matter. But this type of language, it becomes very, very contemporary. It can be reread every time in a different manner. It doesn't have to be connected, especially to the Argentina of the 70s. If you look at the world today, very many of these creations are very contemporary and can tell a lot to people from different cultures and countries. And that's the idea, I think. So that's what I did. And also, I was asked something else, I think, that I forgot. Did I skip something? Did I say everything out of the question? I don't know.
No, yes, you answered everything. Thank you so much. You talked about genres and why you chose to write the way you did. And you also talked about, witnessing, but in different generations. So thank you very much. I am very excited to read your work.
Thank you.
I think I just want to pick up where Sarah left off with the concept of witnessing and giving testimony, because we are talking about two different things. And you mentioned in your life, you have gone and given legal testimony about your experience in a trial, in a truth trial. But you just explained to us another way that you give testimony. And one of the key words that you said earlier too, reparation, that it's your way of working through and disseminating knowledge and history.
Yes.
And it brings me to those three pillars in front of ESMA: memory, truth, and justice.
Yes.
Can you maybe talk a little bit? I know you've talked how you wrote your testimony, and to me it sounded like that psychological weight, that, again, going back to that image of the burden. But what was your experience like in the legal setting, giving testimony in a trial, if you don't mind sharing?
Oh, no, not at all. At the beginning, I didn't want to go to the trials because I didn't have too much information. And in trials, the goal is the sentence of those who committed the crimes. And you needed to have some information. Basically, I had a very poor information because I had been there a few days and with my eyes blindfolded. So it took me time and a lot of changes in my country, whereby they were starting to ask you about your story in the trials instead of asking you questions about certain information that you might not have. So I went to these trials late, at the time when I had already written some of these books that, as you said, were a reparation process. So for me, and my experience is different than for others. For others, going to the trials was a before and an after, was a radical moment in which they finally could speak and face, because in some trials, the perpetrators were there and you could look at them and say these things. And it was very rewarding, paradoxically, because you were the one who had the voice at that moment instead of being the victim. In my case, they were not there, but for me, I had done the work of reparation already, and it was like the last drop of the reparation process. And what I did in one of them that I remember the best was to bring big pictures of those in my family who had disappeared, who, as I said before, are four in my family that disappeared. So I explained how the disappearance process, it was like a class, was not only for one person that disappeared and the traumatic experience. It's like the social tissue is being destroyed. And also we have to consider all the kids that were not born, the kids that were stolen, and the parents who died in the process, because there's a lot of male, basically fathers, who took their lives. My father took his life out of this process because they couldn't face it. So all the traumatic tissue that is created around this, and that encompasses the whole society, if you sum up all these pieces, is all of us. Somehow, even people who don't want to deal with it have someone disappeared in their family. So so it was the last drop of the reparation, I would say. And it is important, it's so important, the way it developed over time in Argentina, the witnessing process in tribunals, because at the beginning it's like you see in the movie, it's the best, the first ones. And in the other ones, you are not facing those who ask questions, because they don't ask questions. You are asked to tell your story. You can be asked one question or two, but basically you tell your story. And there has been a lot of creativity in that sense, especially from the generation of the hijos and hijas, who are a bit not more detached, but who had worked a bit more from another place. They are in another different place from us. And for instance, when the pandemic started, the trial started to be on Zoom. So one woman, one child of a disappeared couple, took off her shirt and had all her this part with the names of the people disappeared, tattooed, but not real tattoos, but tattooed, written the names of all the people disappeared at the time of her parents. And she claimed, she made a request, a powerful request to the trial, to the judges. Well, don't ask us to come again and again to tell you the same. Go and find the documents. We've said this once and again because we declared very many times. It's time for you to do something more radical and just ask, push the military to give you the documentation and do something more about it. So it was amazing. So the space of the trial becomes a performance, and it's not the only ones. It's only an example of several ones. So it's been really interesting what has happened there. And beyond the limits of the tribunal, all of us have gone, survivors are invited sometimes to go to speak at organizations, schools, because there's a lot of memory in this country. My brother was in physics, and he works in a research atomic center. So yesterday and today, after this talk, later on, I went and will go to events that I organize, and they invite me because I am his sister, and they name rooms in the university out of these disappeared people, and in the library they make memorial sites, etc., etc. So this goes against the desire of the government to erase memory, but it's still very present.
I had a follow-up question. If Sara, how are we?
Yes, go ahead with the question.
Okay. It's just such a beautiful segue with what you just said. I keep going back to this quote, and I probably don't have it correct. Those who do not know history are doomed to repeat it. Totally. And this culture of erasure, of forgetting. Yet, like you said, we're in the third generation. We're at the great-grandchildren level.
Yes.
And I think maybe as just to round off our presentation, what are your feelings or perceptions around that sort of quote, those who do not know history are doomed to repeat it? I know it's a heavy question.
I'm afraid it's very, very contemporary. And I'm afraid somehow history has not been totally transmitted or learned. And in this era is less important because the speed of media, of our communication, makes people distance themselves from history. They are in the immediate present with all the information that flows and doesn't leave traces sometimes. So I understand that we live in a different stage, but I also understand that it's very important to keep insisting in because since I know the history, I can identify what is happening. It's the return of the same with a different shape. And I know already what we should be doing, at least minimum things. But people who see it for the first time and never saw it before, they are disorientated. So it's very important to learn from the past, at least something. And then never again that you find that is this impressive situation in the ports in the movie where they say never again is historical. Of course, it's not going to happen because people don't know history and then it repeats itself. But at least we can try to work constantly on this desire for never again, who is never more than a desire, probably, but it's a motor. It's a motor not to repeat ourselves. And so as soon as we see something similar, we should just try to spread the news. I see that we haven't been able to do it, but we have to keep trying. It's what we do here now.
That's the hope that people, like you said, media is moving so fast. It's hard to keep up with what's happening. And this recognition of the strength of memory, the strength of representation, that though there are disappeared, we have the children still present. We have the mothers, we have the grandmothers, that these generations continue to say their name. In
Yes.
your case, to continue to say their names, multiple family members. And I think that's a rather positive note to end today's presentation. I know you're very busy with all your work in the field against forgetting of the burden you continue to carry in such eloquent and committed ways. And I think it's astounding that you have all that energy still. Some of us require more caffeine to keep up. But I would like to say, Nora, thank you very much for your presentation. And if you have any last words you'd like to share, please go ahead.
No, thank you for inviting me. And we in this country learn from the mothers of Plaza de Mayo who still go to demonstrations when they are 92 years old. So we have a model. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nora. And we will thank our audience at Cinema Chat and all those who weren't able to attend in person. You may be watching this in our YouTube channel. So thank you again, and we will end our presentation here today.